Yes. Your PPT is seen now.
Yeah.
Just like Google starting page.
Similar.
Yeah, simple layout. No frills, nothing.
Yeah, design trends are heading in that direction these days.
Yeah, I think the only people are look at the usability. It is more like usability is rather than the aesthetics is taking a lower this one importance.
Not completely. It's
No,
just that
but actually, it is earlier people had tried to be more aesthetics and things like that. Now they feel that it distracts the people, and then the important message is missed out.
yeah, now it's more it's quieter and
Yeah,
the extra elements are removed. So what
yeah,
really
yeah.
is
They give importance to the functionality rather than the look and feel. No? But anyhow, it's all the layouts are subjective matter. It depends on the individuals, and then sometimes bosses they decide what should be the design and how it should look like.
actually that is also changing now.
Yeah, uh,
Yeah.
because when we had the website, we tried to follow the writer website.
Mm,
It's very bland and things like that.
mm,
And those period, I'm talking about 90s, mid 90s,
yeah.
the every part of web and Indian Express and Times of India, they try to came out with the a lot of image links,
Mm,
and then ours was only text link.
mm.
So the people started no say that looks more attractive and things like that. I said it may be attractive, but the loading time, if you compare, our thing is the fastest.
Ah,
And in fact, there were so many people they had sent messages commenting about loading. The Express and Times take almost half a minute to load,
mm.
and whereas Hindu loads in a zip. So then I showed this email to them. Then they become quiet. So I think those days were we are also not knowing about the metrics.
That is true. Yeah.
So the
That's
early part of the mid 90s, when things are so new, we didn't know what we are doing is right or wrong, or which is appealing to people. It's a very difficult period that time.
mm.
So we'll wait for another 2 minutes.
Sure.
So I think that some people have joined in the YouTube, and so we can maybe we'll start in another 1 minute.
Sure.
Uh, Akila, can you start the recording? Okay. PVS, would you like to start?
Yes, sir. We'll start. Good evening, participants. IEEE CS Madras, ACM Chennai, and CSI Chennai cordially invite you to a webinar on Stitching Experience Design into Agile Methodology by Ms. Kavitha Kalyan, Design Director, Borderless Design Business Growth, TCS Design, author and speaker. There are three pillars of high focus in the current landscape of digital transformation, namely business, experience design, and technology. Experience design as a profession includes user experience design, which defines the core foundation of the experience, and user interface design, which encompasses visual design. The entire foundation of UX UI is called experience design. As part of applying design processes in agile environment, experience design plays an important part in the delivery life cycle, and yet it is one of the lesser understood sciences in the IT space. In design-led programs where agile teams are becoming more complex, self-driven clusters of multi-skilled professionals, experienced designers have their own role to play. While business development and testing have been given their space in agile rituals. Experienced design professionals are yet to be absorbed into agile teams as one of their own. Ms. Kavitha will focus on how experienced design can be an integral part of the agile life cycle and the advantage it brings when we focus on design-led delivery. Ms. Kavitha is an energetic, inspiring individual who likes to share stories on experience design with young aspiring designers. She has worked with various customers across geographies and cultures and across domains, deep diving into complex systems to understand them across a diverse range of problem statements. Her expertise ranges from solving UX problems within projects, setting up design operations for customers, and specializing in organizational design. In short, she's a thinker, a storyteller, and a UX practitioner, all rolled into one. Over to Ms. Kavitha now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I would request all the participants to go on to mute so that everyone can hear this presentation clearly and there's no echo. We will be having a QA session at the end, so you can hold on to your questions till the end, and we'll have half an hour for that. Just to give you all a background, I think the audience that we have today is a combination of faculty, students, and young professionals in the IT industry. So I will be walking you through some of the concepts so that everybody comes to the same level of understanding with respect to where the industry is headed from here, okay, where we are and where we are choosing to go. I think there are some of my company colleagues here as well. So please be a little patient with me. There is a little twist in the story at the end of this presentation. So welcome everyone. This is an interesting story on how experienced design plays an important role in digital transformation and where we fall in this agile methodology, which is pretty much taking the industry by storm. So is everyone able to see my screen? Mohan sir, I guess you're able to see the screen, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So let me start with the basics. What is digital transformation? Where did it all stem from? So digital transformation is essentially built of three pillars. In the history of IT, business and technology have played a very dominant role, and it is with time that design came into the picture and had an equally important role to play. This is specifically when we started transitioning from using desktops with mouse and moved towards touchscreen devices. And since that has become such a commonplace thing, everybody is headed into the space of experience design. It's starting to become a very important piece in the larger puzzle. So when you look at digital transformation, okay, there are three pillars to it. First is business. What does business do? So business, basically, they are the custodians of the vision of the company. And what they do is they basically come out with various insights and they draw out the roadmap for the rest to follow with respect to where the business needs to go, what the company needs to do, and what are they trying to do in the digital space. Okay. Technology, on the other side, is basically defining that entire foundation. So whatever we do and think of will basically be on this foundation of technology. The infrastructure has to be in place. The delivery model has to be in place, right? So between business and technology, most of it was getting done. But what really got missed out in the story was actually empathy. So yes, we are making these applications. And yes, we're showing it to the end users, but are they really relating to it? Is it second nature to them? That's the big question there. That's where design comes into the picture. So first things first, I want to kind of change the thought process that design is all about aesthetics. Actually, it isn't. It is about experience, not really aesthetics. Aesthetics plays a small role in the whole picture, but it is the experience that really matters. The entire experience of interaction, the visual, how easily you're able to absorb the content, how easily you're able to complete a task. That's really what design is all about. And it has a very deep impact with respect to the branding strategy. So the overall branding strategy actually influences design. So it's look and feel on one side, it's the experience on the other side. Both of these are very interrelated. So it is very important when we are building something that business, technology, and design work hand in hand. So just to bring everyone onto the common plane, digital transformation, what does it really mean? So we're hearing a lot of these words. If you're on the floor of an office, these words are going to be hitting you just about every day. And the industry is only talking about this right now. So I just picked up the most common terms that we get in the industry. So on one side, you have mobility, we have multi-channel, we have omni-channel, we have a digital ecosystem, we have personalization, automation, experience. We are working with data, we're working with AI, AR, VR. We are working with machine learning, analytics, conversational UI. And we are also trying to collaborate with each other. We try to optimize. We're trying to build an entire experience. The whole ecosystem has to come together in a cloud environment, in Agile, so that we move faster. So all of this is essentially the building blocks of what digital transformation actually becomes. Just to bring in a little more of clarity here, I've put two words into this. One is multi-channel and one is omni-channel. I just want to bring out the difference between these two. It's a very thin line that separates both these, but it's a very important line as well. Multi-channel is basically when the company, the brand, decides that they want to be accessed by anybody, be it a laptop, desktop, a mobile device, a kiosk, a wearable, or any digital interface that they think of. So essentially, you can access this site or application from anywhere, from any device that you choose to. The thing here is you can access it. That's where you kind of stop. So you see the same interface, you see the same site across multiple devices. What is omni-channel? Omni-channel goes a step further from multi-channel. What omni-channel does is it tells you that yes, you can access this site from all these various devices. But what you can additionally do is, suppose, let's take Amazon, since all of us have been there. You start your shopping on your desktop. Okay? You put 2 items in your cart. Then you go about your regular day, and somewhere along the way, you remember that you were shopping at Amazon. So you pick up your mobile device and go back to Amazon. The 2 items that you put in your desktop, they are now reflecting when you access the same site through your mobile phone. So your cart is 2 items. It reflects out there. So you add another 2 items to it. Then you probably walk down to the store. Let's assume Amazon has a brick and mortar store. And you walk down to the Amazon store and you actually go in there and you probably want to pick up a book. So you add that to your cart, and that's a 5th item in your cart. So what is happening? Your cart is persistent, right? It starts from the desktop. You access it, it continues in the mobile. Then you access it at the store, it continues into the store POS. And therefore, your cart is now omni-channel because it can be accessed by all the devices. The data is updated in all the devices, and you can conclude your transaction at the store POS, therefore completing the transaction in an omni-channel environment. Another example for you is, this will be more closer to home. I'm sure all of us have done enough binge watching with Netflix and Amazon Prime. In the OTT industry, what happens is you probably start watching an episode, season 5, episode 3, on your desktop. Okay, then you traverse. You've done season 5, you've done episode 5, you've done episode 6. For whatever reason, the rest of the family is still working with the remote and the television is not coming to you yet. So you then move on to your mobile. When you go to your mobile, what happens? It says, you're at season 5, episode 6. Do you want to resume? So you resume in your mobile phone. Then you keep watching. You go to episode 7, 8. Then suddenly, probably in the evening, you realize nobody is at the television. The remote is free. You probably land up to watch the rest of that on the television screen. So you're now resuming at episode 8. So what is happening here? It's so subconscious to us. It's so natural to us that we just keep binge watching and keep going and we finish seeing that serial. But actually speaking, we went through a complete omni-channel experience. We started with a desktop. We moved to a mobile device. Then we moved to the television. We actually accessed it with three different environments. One was with a mouse click, the other one was with a touch screen, and the third is with a remote control, possibly with voice enabled, but largely with buttons to press. So we, as experienced designers, have to really think of all the various channels that we're talking about, the nature of these channels, why is this channel there, and what part of the ecosystem is going to stitch into this channel, and therefore, how do I build the entire journey, start to finish, crossing all these channels one after the other, and ensure that the entire ecosystem is covered and put in place. So basically, digital transformation is when you don't just do one application in your mobile phone or one website. It's not just that. Digital transformation is when you do an entire rehaul of your ecosystem and ensure that you're covering every aspect of it. What would that be? Let's go into a few examples for you. Okay, so the examples here are the reality of transformation, what worked, what didn't. So when transformation came over, it's been around for about 10 years now at least. When the transformation journey started, when companies started adopting this new way of working, what happened is those who failed to adopt, those who did not move into the next space, were predominantly, the examples are like BlackBerry, Motorola, TiVo. You don't see them anymore. So basically, they failed to adopt the transition that took place. There are others who integrated digital with their legacy. So they didn't completely do away with their legacy, but they integrated digital with legacy. So essentially, you have HP and Bank of America that essentially took their history forward in terms of the legacy getting into a new digital space. But those who actually made the transformation, who moved right across to the other side and embraced digital completely, wholeheartedly, and adapted to it, are essentially Netflix, Apple, Spotify. So they completely changed the rules of the game. So let's look at a couple of examples with respect to transformation. Who did what and how? Netflix, they reinvented the entire video experience, right? So initially they had these videos that you could rent out, then it went into distribution, then it went into consumption of the same digital content through OTT. The entire binge watching sessions that we do, thanks to Netflix and Amazon Prime, that's transformation. So it took us through the entire experience. Amazon, they reinvented retail shopping. We barely go out and shop anymore. We are so used to getting things delivered to us, apart from the pandemic. We have anyway been on Amazon for a while. But the more interesting ones are Heathrow. Heathrow is basically reinventing passenger experience at the airports. So one thing is to book a ticket and go. The other is to have a fantastic experience when you're awaiting your flight at a particular gate at the airport. What Heathrow does is you don't need to register with Heathrow. You just need to walk through the door. You walk through the airport gate and Heathrow just takes your face recognition. They create an ID for you. They create a QR code for you. You're already kind of registered without having registered. Then they basically observe where you go, what you do at the airport. If you do this about twice, if you come to Heathrow about twice or thrice, by the third time, even if you didn't register, they completely know you. They personalize the experience. So they know that you go to the bookstore. They know that you go to have a coffee. So they will possibly stitch in an experience for you, give you offers, and make the entire journey personalized when they know that you're back at the airport again. So Heathrow completely took the advantage of technology to transform airport experience when people are going either transiting or they're going city to city. So that was Heathrow. That's how they transformed it. Uber. We all know Uber. We have Uber replicas back here. So they reinvented taxi service. And Airbnb. They reinvented hotel accommodation. They gave a whole lot of other people, they gave them a whole new arena where they could look at business. So these are just examples of how transformation has changed our lives, how we have gone back and related to it, right? So bottom line, what is really happening here? The 4 pillars of transformation and how do we fit into this picture? First and foremost, we are looking at the customer. The customer needs to be engaged with us constantly. Then to engage the customer, we need our employees to be enabled So we have to empower them with data so that they know the customer before the customer shows up. Now you have artificial intelligence, you have all the other various types of technologies that enable our employees to understand that customer while they walk through the door, right? And they already know what this person is coming for, what are they going to do. And then they basically act on before the customer comes forward and says something, they already have all their information ready to talk about something. So that's very proactive from the employee side. Then, to make the employees so empowered, we need to make the products and the services, the service offerings have to be equally rich. So you have to get the personalization done. You have to get the intelligence onboarded. You need to have some degree of artificial intelligence running in the background, scanning through the data, trying to understand who this person is, and giving the relevant information, recommendations, etc., to the employee. And in order for the product to get transformed, we need an infrastructure. We need the operations to be set up. So just to give you an example of how this all stitches in, let's take an example in retail. Okay, so you have a customer who walks through the door in retail. Okay, he walks through the door, he comes into an apparel store, or he or she walks into an apparel store. Now, this customer is very conscious and is a frequent visitor to the store. So you have enough data to look at the past transactions of this person, how often they shop, what's the typical budget they spend at the store, how frequently do they come, what kind of taste do they have, do they like red, white, they don't like black, what are they looking for? So the employee over a period of time looks at the data of this customer, understands that this customer has already bought 3 dresses and, they already know what they have purchased in the past. They can actually cross-sell something. They can upsell something. So they can actually recommend an item, or example, a pair of shoes or something that goes with something they bought last time, right? So we are basically empowering the employee to know enough about the customer and act on that. So the application needs to give them that data. So the moment they see that customer coming through the door, they know exactly what this person's done and what they want, what they might want, what can I sell them, all of that. But for that, we need to be very conscious of the fact of what kind of end users are we looking at. Okay. Now, yes, we are looking at an end user who's possibly a store associate. The persona is one store associate, a representation of that store associate. But when we are thinking about the motivation of the store associate, we could get into a bit of a problem there. So what we need to be very cognizant of is what are the motivations of various types of store associates. Let me give you an example. We were actually working on one of the projects where the persona was definitely a store associate. They both had to basically make it they had to make a sale. They definitely had to have the customer buy something from them. That was the bottom line. But there was one fundamental difference between these store associates. Essentially, for this chain of apparel stores, the store associate who was in New York City was on his toes. He had almost transformed the job of a store associate into a fashion designer and was going with the customer to pick up stuff, and it had to be done real time and real fast. So they had to be really up to date with things. On the other side, we had the same kind of store associate, similar store chain, okay, in Florida, who was not half as motivated and could sit back and talk to a customer about the weather and talk about 2 other things and sit there for 2 hours. We're talking about 2 completely different sets of lifestyles, completely different sets of motivations, but both of them have to make a sale. How do you make the guy in Florida get enthusiastic about making a sale? And how do you ensure that you got the right data to feed the guy in New York to make that sale really fast because the customer's not quite waiting? So we have to look at empathy in both these situations to enable our employee to make that sale so that the customer comes back tomorrow and feels good that it was personalized, the employee understood what the customer wanted, and that relationship was built. And this was built mainly because the product had all the data to offer, and the overall operations was put in place to make this entire situation roll out. So transformation is not about any one thing. It's not only about technology, or it's not only about business. It's about technology, business, and experience. All three of it has to come together. All the players, all the stakeholders have to be given their due, and it all has to stitch in. So essentially, what are we talking about? We're talking about a very basic thing. It's called changing the way we fundamentally think about how we even address design, how we even address the entire digital space that we are working with. So yes, there's a race against time. Yes, everyone wants to do something new. There is barely any time to get things across. But fundamentally, there has to be a change in the way we think, the way we operate. How do we go about doing something? In order to enable that, the fundamental thing that we have is inexperienced design. We basically work with three things. I'm just doing a time check here. Yeah. So we basically have three things that we have to focus on. One, from experience design perspective, we need to have a context, we need to have a narrative, and we need to have a process. These three elements are what stitches up experience design, and that's when the experience is complete. So broadly speaking, we're looking at, let's take each one of these as we go. Okay, so when we go with context, one is you need to understand what the business wants. You need to understand what the end user wants. You need to understand that there could be a gap between both of them. Business is saying we have to do it in this particular way and we have to do it by this time. And the end users are not particularly tuning in to what you're producing. So you need to know what they want ahead as a discovery. You need to understand what they want to get the empathetical side of it, and then stitch in the rest of the piece of the puzzle. So we need to get the pulse of the story. We need to define the context in which we are operating, work with the backlog that the business has given, and take in the insights and recommendations that we went and figured out with respect to the end users. The second is narrative. Having done all of this, we now need to have deep insights into the environment in which that end user is. What is that end user doing? What does that end user want? And how do I hand this over to him? So basically, it is looking at one, navigation. It is looking at how everything is stitching in together with respect to the information architecture. How is the interaction going to be? How is this person going to interact with the device? What are the insights I can add as I go by? And how do I build this entire experience for this person so that they don't have any problems? They don't need to go thinking about what they're doing. It's seamless for them. And last but not the least is process. What is process? Process is when I ensure that I standardize everything. I have to standardize all that I'm doing so that it is easy for that user, no matter whether they're looking at a mobile device or a desktop or a television screen or whatever, what they see is consistent across all these digital interfaces. So we have to ensure that there is some degree of consistency, there is some degree of standardization, and it's also a scalable model at the same time. So design operations, DevOps, becomes very, very important. So in the Agile world, you'll hear a lot of DevOps, but DevOps is something that people are still waking up to. So design operations is an equally important piece in the puzzle to ensure that this whole thing stands up and it's held together. Just to give you some examples with respect to all of this, let's go to context. Okay. What is context in design? Let's take the example of booking an airline ticket. All of us have booked an airline ticket at some point in life. So let's take that experience. If it's booking of an airline ticket, it's plain and simple. You go in, you book the airline ticket, you basically, you see that screen, you have the form, it's either a round trip or you're going one way. You probably could add a hotel and some transportation along with it. So it's a straightforward journey that you go through. But what if I had to complicate this journey for you? So typically an airline booking journey would be, you have this form on the homepage. You start with a form. You fill in all your details from date to date, how many people are traveling, and you basically pick up round trip or single trip or whatever. And then you go and search. And then you get all these airline options that you get. possibly with the cheapest flights on the top. And it's ordered in some form of filtration. And you possibly add your own filters to just see exactly which flight works for you in terms of time, in terms of number of stops, in terms of, how much time to go from one place to the other, what's the transit time, what's the waiting period, all of that. So once you've done that, it takes you into, do you want to book your seat, any additional ancillary items that you want. So that's the next thing that it picks up. And then it goes into the actual payment gateway and out. So this whole journey is very understood. But how do you handle inclusive design in the story? How do you bring in the context of, I'm booking a ticket for a family, international flight. They've got twins, both under the age of 2. I need a bassinet, potentially for both of them. How do I book a ticket for such a person? There's no answer. It's not upfront. It's not there on the site. You're going to go dig some number of links to figure out how to do that. Where do I go for the bassinet? How do I figure it out? Or let's take another story, another situation where you have a traveler is traveling from one place to another and wants to take their pet along with them. And the pet has to come in a cage. And there could be rules with respect to whether the pet goes into the cabin or whether it goes into the cargo. There are regulations around this. So they need to know all this data. Is the pet vaccinated? Not carrying any disease? All of this is very serious. The airport officials will ask these questions. So do we have all this taken care of? But is that showing up on the site? It's not there. And where do you go look for it? It's not clear. FAQ, I don't know how many of us really go and look at help in FAQs because it's like a whole, encyclopedia sitting in there. You don't know how to look for your content there. So how do we make it easy for the user instead of taking them down that lane? The third thing, senior citizens trying to book something or senior citizen trying to access some information at the airport through a kiosk. Now, the thing is, senior citizens are already intimidated by digital, by the transformation of digital itself. And how do you make it seamless for them to be able to, cope with it? So different people at different points go through that intimidation, and we need to ensure that the system is inclusive in nature. It's accessible to everybody. It ensures that everyone comes into it. So we need to account for all these little things. Now, the business is not really thinking, except they're saying that, we have to include everybody. Technology is more inclined towards the functionality of the page. So who are we doing it for is not really their cup of tea right now. So it is us who have to think the empathy side of things and say, okay, but my actual user is this kind of a person who can't go through the site as it stands today. It's another simple thing. A person doesn't have to be in any of these categories to make it inclusive. It could also be a totally different situation where you're building a store application for a store associate somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere. When I say Northern Hemisphere, I'm really talking about like the Netherlands, Sweden, that side of town. And they basically are living in a cold, 6 months of cold climate, right? And they possibly are permanently wearing gloves. And you have to design the interface for them. How would you do it? So we think that when we are designing something, a person is working just with their hands, not with their gloves. They don't have gloves on. But if this person's like lifting up very heavy load and they're going to be working with a tablet at the same time, they're not going to be taking off their gloves every time. They're going to work along with the gloves. So we need to worry about fat finger context. We need to ensure those buttons are larger. So there's a lot that goes into understanding the context in which we are designing. So there has to be an additional element of sensitivity to ensure that we are scalable and we are also covering that area that we're talking about. Let me take another example with respect to narrative. Okay, this is a very interesting example because it will possibly change the way we think going forward with respect to accessibility. So all of us have been taught that accessibility is only for people who have some kind of a disability of any sort, right? This particular example will completely nullify that complete thought process. So let me tell you the story. What if we had to, first and foremost, do UX for military, for defense? Does UX play a role in defense, in military? Apparently, it does. It is a very important role to play. We wouldn't even have thought of it. So, let me give you the story here. Let's take an example of an IED specialist. An IED detection specialist is a person who basically detects where there are landmines or any kind of bombs and has to neutralize it in order to save lives. So he's in the field, he's leading this military convoy down some rugged road. He's in an armored Husky vehicle. This picture over here, this is an armored Husky vehicle, and it has got all the equipment inside it. Okay. He's got all the ground penetrating radar to give him the data, and that's feeding into his system. And he's sitting in this cramped Husky with a whole lot of other people. And his primary job is to ensure that the safety of everybody is taken care of. And they know exactly where that bomb or landmine could be, and they have to diffuse it in order to move on. That is the use case. Now, if we have to go into it in greater context, in understanding this narrative, we need to understand what kind of an environment he's working in. So if you have to deep dive, for one, this soldier is operating in a cramped car. It's driven on rough terrain. So everybody's like kind of not very comfortably seated. Okay. He's responsible for everyone's life inside there. He's wearing heavy duty gloves. He's working in crazy conditions. The temperature could range anywhere from -7 degrees to 33 degrees centigrade. And he has to make really quick decisions. He has to be accurate, and he has to ensure that everybody is safe. That's one part of it. Now, the second thing is, what kind of a device is he using? He's using a hard-to-touch touchscreen. And this touchscreen, he's open to sunlight. So the text has to be readable in bright sunlight. It can't be washed away. So we have to take care that in such a situation, aesthetics really doesn't have a role to play here. There's no room for aesthetics in such a story, right? So, but we need to ensure that the experience is completely covered. So experience design is a combination of UX and UI. And not always aesthetic. It's not all about a pretty picture. It is about how it works and how easily it can be used, and how simple and straightforward it is and seamless to the end user. So what does he do? Basically, the data on the screen needs to be divided in a hierarchical way to ensure that any information that is displayed is visible hierarchically. Any alerts towards the top of the screen, which is what the iOS and Android platforms today are typically doing. So it seems that is a best practice that is coming down, right? So we have these alerts are right on top of the screen. Then you have all the analysis data, right? So that is taking about 80% of the viewport. And at the bottom is where all the action buttons are. So broadly, the screen is already divided. You know exactly where each piece of the data has to go. So one is the layout. Where does he see what and how does he act on it, right? Second is the data, the validity of the data. How trustable is this data? What is the accuracy of this data, historical data that is coming in? Is this data ensuring that what it is detecting is actually the landmine or the bomb and not some other debris? So it has to be all of this put together for him to know that he's taking the right decision. And then you have visual cues, recommendations to tell him that you have to do these things. Then he has to identify the threat location and then move on with the action that he has to do. So it gives recommendations of do this or do that. He gets the data coming in. So it is, how does the data come in? Data is coming in, yes. It has to be displayed on the screen. How do we display it? So what matters here now is the biggest problem statement in this. One part of it is the layout. The other part of it is showing these recommendations to him real time. But the most important thing is to ensure that we have a color combination that actually works and beats the sunlight, and that he's able to see it against the bright sunlight in a car that is in a Husky that's completely shaking. So he's in a cramped environment. It's all shaking. he still has to be able to read it and tell them to stop or do something, right? So that brings us to the next level of depth, which is basically, how do you define the contrast between two colors? There's a concept called relative luminous value. If the relative luminous value, the delta between two colors, is wide, then the contrast is better. If the delta is not that wide, then they're not going to see the two colors one against the other. Readability becomes a problem. Here is a small example on the right. So the first one does not have the best, right? So the contrast value isn't too much. They can't read, they can't see it. Whereas in the second example, you actually have a reasonably larger delta, so you can see the contrast between the two colors. So this would translate to something like AAA compliance. So AA compliance is what we typically do in the commercial industry. But if you're looking at defense and military and things like that, we pretty much have to move into AAA compliance, which means higher level of contrast. You kind of keep design aside, but you take the experience into the picture. Design is one aspect of it, but the larger experience design that we're looking at is, how do you deal with the data, the information architecture, and ensure that he has exactly the right amount of information for him on that screen to make a decision. So once he acts on it, then we move to another screen, and that screen comes with a totally different set of things, and that is contextual to that screen. So the direction in which UX is going these days is a whole lot more thinking, and that is, the information architecture is primordial. We need to know exactly how the content on that screen is going to get stitched. So it is not a sitemap. Information architecture and sitemap are two separate things. Sitemap basically shows you how the content hierarchy looks. That is a sitemap, yes. How deep do you go and how easily do you come out? Information architecture, on the other side, is when you do an action, when you press a button and you do a call to action, it has a repercussion on some 3 other areas. Your profile gets updated, something else will get updated. So 3 databases get updated at the same time. So what are you actually doing? You're in that one click of a button has actually gone and updated 3 other sections. So those sections need to be connected. That's where information architecture comes in. So we do have all our pages named and we know exactly what the guy is doing. But when he submits something, it has to go and affect something. So you have to draw the dotted line to say, okay, so this happens. So A, this one gets affected. B, something else gets affected. 3, something else gets affected. You don't do that in a sitemap. You do that in an information architecture. So we all know in one glance exactly what that whole site is about, what the entire application is about. How is the interaction taking place? Where does a person go? What does he do? What data is coming in? What data is getting updated? And therefore, what is the new situation this person is? What's the next action that this person has to do with respect to the overall customer journey? So that is how we stitch all this together. So the narrative is basically built around this. The narrative is built around how things are connected to each other. What is the interaction between them? How can I spruce it up? And how does it stitch into the overall requirement and the empathy and the technology? All of this comes together. So narrative is the next big piece in the puzzle after context. Okay. The third piece, which is the space that I wanted to talk about in greater length in today's conversation, is design process. Broadly speaking, design process, this is what it is. You have a vision, you go ahead and design for it, then you develop it, then you deploy it, and then it's ready for going to market. Broadly, that's what it is. If we had to deep dive a little into how we do deliveries, this is just a recap of how we have moved from one thing to another. I just put it all together in one place for us to get a view of how the industry has moved in these last 10 to 15 years. Previously, we used to work in a waterfall model. A waterfall model was the requirement would come in, it would take some time, the requirement would get done, it would go to some level of depth, it would come to the design. Design would make all the screens and all of that, then it would go to development, and then it would go live, deploy and test and out. That was waterfall. But with time, Agile stepped in. So Agile basically starts with the same requirement, but then you go into a cycle. You design and develop, Then again, you design and develop. So you're taking pieces of requirement. So you're not taking the entire thing in one shot. You're taking pieces of requirement. The whole requirement is called a backlog. It breaks down into stories. You pick up X number of stories for a sprint of some size, 2 weeks or whatever, and you roll. So you go in a cyclic order and you ensure that through the cyclic order of Agile, you are still reaching the end goal. What is lean? This is the situation where you do Agile, yes, but you keep making these releases and you go to the market for feedback. So you do one set of release, then you go to the market for feedback. You bring back the feedback from the market and you again go through the next set of iteration, and then you add on some more features and you go through the cyclic process in that, but you are constantly getting market feedback while you're going. So it depends on how your customers want to look at the cycle of the process in which they want to follow these methodologies. They could go either Agile or they could go lean. So essentially, if the customer has decided that every 3 months I have to deploy, or they could the cycles could be even smaller. In that case, lean takes over. There are situations where customers are working so real time and agile that they follow the lean methodology, where every 2 weeks they'll be sending something out. So that is one side of the story. Agile takes care of the other side of the story, where you're trying to build this whole product and taking it to a logical conclusion and going out. So it depends on how you're working with various customers. So this is just to bring you to the common ground of what is waterfall, what is agile, what is lean. Okay? And therefore, how does that transform our world? So waterfall was when everything was very linear. The requirements, design, implementation, testing, maintenance. If you had to put that onto a timeline, it is one after the other, not simultaneously. That is where the difference comes in. Now with Agile, it has started getting incremental. Incremental means it's the same requirement. This is the whole requirement A to Z. Here, what do? I take the requirement, the backlog, I take it, but I'm not taking A to Z. I take it in pieces. So I'll first go 1 to 5, then I'll go 6 to 10, then I'll go 11 to 15, then I'll go to 16 to 20. I keep picking up stories as I go based on how much I can do in those 2 weeks. How much can design do in those 2 weeks? How much can technology do in those 2 weeks? So basically, we iterate. Iteration means when I'm done with the design, I go back and get it tested by the end users or by the stakeholders or business users, whoever they are. I get it tested by them. And when I'm testing it by those people, they tell me, okay, this worked, this didn't, something went wrong, something worked. Maybe we could think of something else. We bring back that feedback. We could possibly absorb it into the next sprint cycle. But if there is something that they come out with, which is drastically changing the whole environment, then we need to possibly go back and think it out some more and see whether it can be brought it goes into the backlog, yes. But when does it come? Phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, when do we take it, right? But we take all the observations, comes in. We account for it. So this is waterfall versus agile across the timeline, the way it changes. So the mentality of the people on the ground who are actually working through these methodologies have to be aligned in the same way of thinking so that this actually works. But for this to work, there's a very basic problem. Do we know what is in that backlog? Is the backlog really clear? What is going on? Has the customer done his thinking? We can't assume that our customer knows everything already, right? So how do we work with this customer, right? So it basically takes us some time to even understand what are we working with. The process itself it is a journey that starts from ambiguity, and over a period of time, it goes towards clarity. And that journey that we do could take 3 months, 2 months, it could take a volume of time. But how do we do that process? There is a universal process called the double diamond. Okay? The reason why it's called a double diamond is because it is drawn out as 2 diamonds, but there's a reason for this. The first diamond is basically, what is the problem you're solving? The second diamond is, how are you solving it? So one is a what, the other is a how. And this is something all of us do subconsciously. We're not aware of it, but we do it subconsciously. So at the beginning of a project, what's the situation? We don't know. It could be anything, right? We want to get to, we know, and this is how it should be at the end of the cycle. So coming back to the first half is customer comes and tells us, okay, I want ABCD. Now, the clarity of that brief itself might not be there, which means we need to brainstorm along with this customer. We need to understand what is going on. We need to understand the industry. So, where is this customer with respect to competition? Where is this customer with respect to the end user who's coming to his site? How many end users are coming? How many are dropping off his website? How many are not downloading his app? What is his situation? Where does he want to go with this? Right? All these questions kind of get answered. And what are the end users looking for? What is business looking for? So we have a whole set of methodologies that are tried and tested, and they work. So we do our research. Experienced design does the research part of it. So it is a divergent part of the process. Divergent means I have a blank slate and I am filling it with all the possible ideas I can get, all the possible information I can get. I'm talking to end users, I'm talking to stakeholders, I'm talking to business, I'm talking to and everybody. I'm probably even talking to my developers, everybody. And we are all trying to figure out what to do and how to do it, right? So this is the research that comes out. Then the next part of it, this is the discover part of it. When you're coming down into converging, into synthesizing the data that you've got. Now, all of this is like rough notes you've taken everywhere. You've been writing all over the world. So you have to collect all of that. Now you come into synthesizing it. You're converging. So there are 10 things you found that could work. Okay, there are 10 problems that you could take. But now you don't have time for all 10. So you have to pick up 3 or 4. That's your priority, right? So now it converges. The synthesis is a converging action where we basically say, okay, your problem is 1 to 10. We are going to take problem 1 to problem 4. These are your priorities. And this is what we are going to go with. So that is when you kind of rescope. You kind of define the brief requirements. You define it to a granular level. This is what we are going to do. Okay, very good. So we figured out what we want to do. Now the problem is, how do we do it? So when it comes to how to do something, all roads lead to Rome. Which road will you take? So again, it's a divergent action. In the divergent action, you could come up with 3-4 ways of doing something. There is no hard and fast rule that you have to go only one single way. There are best practices, yes, but we could break that rule. So when you're going on a divergent path, you're trying to pick up all the possible ways to solve the problem. You're ideating. You again go into a series of, okay, there are 10 ways to go to Rome. Now, the second part, the converging part, or the last diamond, right? The converging part is, yes, I know there are 10 ways to go to Rome, but I'm going to take second and fourth because that's the one that works for us the best, makes business happy, technically feasible, design is good. It's like a win-win to all of us and the end user. So let's go with route 2 and route 4. So you come down this converging action and you actually go and implement it. So it's kind of a collective decision that goes through this journey from ambiguity towards clarity through this process. And we all are doing it knowingly or unknowingly. This is a process we follow anyway. So it's this whole double diamond method of working actually crystallizes that thought that you started off with not understanding how to do something, but at the end of it, you're pretty certain you want to do it. And you want to do it in a particular way, backed by data, backed by all the research that you have done. So there's a reason why you're doing what you're doing. And of course, it comes with its usability, it comes with its aesthetics, comes with its brand value, comes with the technology, business is happy. All of that is ticked because it is data driven. So nobody can say I like or I don't like. There's no room for that conversation because it's no longer subjective. It is extremely logically driven. So the bottom line here is that experienced design is a very logic-driven approach. You do all the research to get to that answer. So it is not a nice to have. It is a very important piece in the puzzle with respect to stitching in empathy, which is actually subjective, into a very logical environment. So how do we go about that? Break it down even more. So we have to break it down into 5 pieces. Strategy, first part. What does the customer want? How's he looking at his business? How's the brand looking at it? What is the perception the brand wants people to look at it as? What is business looking at it as? What is the goals? What is the whole vision going to be? And therefore, how does that relate to research analysis? How does that come into the form of use cases, user stories? How do we define the personas? So, use cases, user stories in an agile world will turn out to be a backlog. All of this would go together. The personas, who are the people I'm working with in the ecosystem? Customer, enterprise, what is happening? What is the store associate doing? Who's doing what? What's going on, right? Then we go doing some workshops to understand what these people think, how are they thinking, what are they doing. So everybody comes together and we kind of collaboratively work together. It's no longer, they tell us and we have to think it out and come back and we have to approve or disapprove. No, they work along with us. So we are working together. It's a collaborative environment. And that, of course, in a digital world, we come out with the design, we come out with all the assets and everything. And that experience that we drew out, the experience that we designed, has to go back to the end user for validation. They need to tell us that we got it right. There's something called the fail fast approach. It means I want to fail fast so that I don't fail later on in the day when I'm doing UAT, user acceptance testing, at the end of my project. That's not when I want to fail. I want to fail now so that I know that I can fix it, so that the ripple effect of changing it doesn't cost me much. So sooner I go and get this validated, the better for me. And lastly, how does design deliver? So we deliver in terms of patterns, we deliver in terms of templates. And now that we're talking about an ecosystem across various channels, we deliver in the form of what is called a design system. Design system is a very important piece. It is what rules. It is the building blocks in experienced design. And that's the thing that we hand over to developers. And that's what defines the branding strategy for the customer in the next 5 years, 10 years. So it is a very important piece in the puzzle. So apart from the technical framework, you also need to have the design system in place to hold this whole thing together, because digital branding is an extension of the branding journey of a particular company, of any company for that matter. So that makes our life even more interesting now. How do we fit into Agile? DevOps has figured itself out. Where does design fit in this puzzle? So this whole journey, right? The strategy, research and analysis, UX, design, deliver, has to fit itself into the Agile life cycle. So what happens? We basically do the empathy side of things, the defining, the ideating, all the discover part of it gets done here. All the defining gets done here. When we come to this point, the first point, we come to a point where we are prototyping. We do a prototype, we go back to the end user and say, hey, is this working for you? Or we go back to business and say, hey, is this working for you? Somebody has to say, yes, it's working. Till they say, yes, it's working, we're going to keep doing it. So it's iterative. Okay. Then we say, okay, so they go through that cycle. We keep iterating. We learn what they want. We test it against them. We go on the cycle, and then it is ready for sign off. And then we get into the sprint cycle. This is when design gets into the sprint cycle world. So your sprint 1 to sprint N in DevOps starts here. By that time, this much should have been done, at least. Now, it doesn't mean at this point that your entire requirement of the whole backlog is done here. No, that's not the story. You need to start the thought process. You need to kickstart it. So you pick up the first 5 stories that they have decided to do for sprint 1. So you do the same thing here. So for the design, we do the sprint 1 design, not sprint N design, sprint 1 design. We come up to here and do it. And then we go into sprint cycles one after the other. So incrementally we go, because at this point, we've pretty much decided what is the look and feel going to be, what is the navigation going to be, what's the information architecture going to be. All of that is fixed up. So from here on, it is execution. We just have to keep executing design after design. And as we go, the sprint cycle rolls and the development team gets all that it needs to take the development cycle through. So design and development from sprint 1 to sprint N, this is when design fixes itself into the dev cycle. So, very nice. What does the agile team look like? So, broadly speaking, this is just a broad diagram that I want to draw out for to just make sure that everybody understands what we are working with respect to agile. So, one, you have a business owner. Business owner is on one side. He knows what he is looking for. So, therefore, he's handed over that responsibility to a product owner. Now, the product owner is the one who's going to be working with us and going to be blessing the work and saying, yes, it's working the way they want it. Now, the business owner and the product owner are reasonably influenced by the end users and the domain experts. So the domain experts will say, this is how the industry is going. This is the trend of the industry. Everybody is going in this direction. We should go in a similar direction. That's what the domain experts will say. End users will say, it's working or not working for me. This is not how I had thought it out. It has to go according to the way we are thinking, or the mental model has to map in some way or the other. So the end users and the domain experts are the ones who influence how that backlog is going to evolve. And the product owner is responsible for that. The Scrum Master is a facilitator. So the Scrum Master basically ensures that day-to-day work is getting done. The backlog bits of stories are taken from the backlog and it's getting rolled out. So the team, the Scrum team broadly, would cover designers, developers, QA, business analysts, tech architect. And this group would be a combination of cross-functional roles, multi-skilled people, and not more than 9 members. More than 9 is a crowd. So this is the composition of the optimal team that you need to get some feature out of the way. Okay. So if we have to look at this, our designer is sitting in here. Okay. Now, even if you look at the industry, okay, this is evolving. Basic Agile is evolving to a more complex version. The industry is moving into a more complex version of Agile. Spotify is actually become the blue-eyed boy in this whole picture. What Spotify basically has defined is this one Agile team you had here, this one Scrum team that you had here, that we built up, 9-member Scrum team, actually becomes a squad. This squad is that Scrum team. Scrum Master, QA, development, both back-end, front-end development, and product owner. Interestingly, in Shopify's world, they did not put a designer into the story. Of course, that upset me a bit, but we will work around that. So the whole world is following this. Where is the designer? Can you spot the designer anywhere? I can't. So you have squads. So for the best example for squads is essentially the way possibly the way Best Buy works. What Best Buy does is they have the typical retail journey. Like Amazon, Best Buy works exactly in the same way, 7 pages to get to payment. But interestingly, every page in Best Buy is divided among squads. So there'll be one squad which will work only on category page. Or a set of squads, one squad or a set of squads will work only on a category page. Another set of squads will work only on a product detail page. Another set of squads will work only on the product listing page. Another one will work only on the payment gateway. So what are we looking at? We're looking at multiple sets of agile teams with this combination working together to do quick deliverables. So we're going into a lean way of working, right? So every 2 weeks, they're going to deploy it. Where is our designer in the story? So let's just see what this agile team structure looks like. So basic agile team, 9 members, we were clear. Now, if you take those 9 members, each one becomes a squad. Okay? Now, if you group 4 squads, it becomes a tribe. So if you can have many tribes, so you basically take chunks of squads and each one becomes a tribe. And they're working on innovation. They're working on a particular piece of the larger puzzle. Okay? And then you have the guilds. The guild is basically a set of experts within this set of tribes. So there could be 5 guys who are purely technical, looking at an aspect of, say, search, and they are looking at how that feature can be improved, or they're looking at only the aspect of cart, and they're trying to see how can that cart be made better. Can I bring delivery into the item level? Can I bring return into the item level? Right now, delivery, return, all of this is globalized. And end of the cart, when you put all your items into a cart and you go right up to payment, you basically have delivery and return is a collective decision you take across all your items. It's not individual to an item. So how could you do it? You could do it anyway, right? So you will basically have a guild of practitioners who could be either developers or design or anything. But this guild will essentially decide how that feature has to evolve within the larger ecosystem of the website. So how do I evolve this cart? So you're no longer looking at one website design. No, website design is there, but now you're looking at one feature in that website design which has to evolve over a period of time. That means you're going deeper into the science of how that whole thing works and how do we improvise and ensure that that user is going to stay on the site and not just exit. So this is the way Shopify kind of stitched Agile together. This is the way the whole industry is headed towards. This is a complexity we face. And interestingly, there's no design here. So that doesn't matter. We'll figure it out. We'll put ourselves in there. So how do we work? Studying how the industry has gone about understanding how design works with technology, there's a fundamental operating principle that differs between both these mindsets. Now, if you look at anybody on, it's not just the technology side of things, it's about the technology, the QA, the BA, all of them are more logically driven. Okay, doesn't mean that the designer is completely aesthetically driven, but this group is more logically driven, meaning to say that they're more task driven. So you give me a story and tell me the first 4 stories. I will take those stories as a task and I will finish it and go. They are not really looking at, is that journey complete? Is the story complete? Is that customer journey getting completed? Not necessarily. You probably got the first 4 pages, the next 5 pages are still waiting for the next sprint. So the way these people are wired is to take chunks of work and finish based on a certain degree of velocity that is defined. Now, how do designers work? We designers think differently. We think logically. We also think with respect to the sentiment. We also think with emotion. So logic has to be there. Emotion is also there. Both are stitched into it. So when we step into the picture, we are thinking logically. Where were we thinking logically? Let me just go back 2 steps for you to just know and reconnect back to the past where we were talking. Our logic is built in the UX side of things, workshop, customer journey, wireframe, workflow. This area is where we will do all the logical thinking. How to put the information architecture together, how to make this workflow work together. We actually do this in wireframes, which is black and white, so that we keep any color out of the way, we keep any emotion out of the way. It is purely logical, it's purely functional. And we are trying to see how is the easiest way and what is the seamless way to get past. So one side, we are looking at logic. And on the other side, we bring in the brand and we look at the emotion, the sentiment, the perception. That's what the brand is about. So we bring that also in. So we have the dual role of looking at logic and looking at sentiment. So the designer kind of has to fit into this completely logical world with a degree of sentiment. So he just can't stop it just halfway and say 4 stories now and I won't look at the file later. No, he has to have the larger view to know what he's working with. So for us, it's very important that we know the overall strategy of this customer. We need to know the business strategy. We need to evolve the UX strategy. And we need to work along with the technical team to ensure that while that larger picture is aware, we are aware of it, we are going bit by bit towards it. And each bit has to stitch into the next bit. So it cannot be in silos. So it all has to work its way together and it has to become a common whole. So what do we do? There are two ways that design can operate. One, you embed your guy inside the agile team. Two, you work in a centralized way. So when you work in a centralized way, you do X number of designs and hand it over to the agile teams, and they will take it, they will consume it, and then you move on to something else. Or you do the embedding. Both have their plus and minus. There are pros and cons in both these. There's no right and wrong. They have their pros and cons. So in an embedded story, what happens is you put your design guy in the middle of the agile team. So the design person has to work with the product owner, has to work with the developer, understand the feasibility checks, go back to the product owner, get it signed off, and move on. So the designer actually has a view of how things get done in development. They have a view of all the other cross-functional roles. They get a larger view of the puzzle. And they are part of all the agile rituals. They understand the story at the same time as the developers do. It all goes together. Okay? Whereas in a centralized world, designers work with designers. So there is a peer review that can take place. They're not working in silos. Here they're working together. So the design system is more clearer. In both, there is a design system. But in the second one, there is more clarity as to, okay, what did you update? What did I update? Any duplication? Those things. So that is the other way of working. So there, it depends on how that company wants to execute a particular project in an agile methodology and where does design fit into it. So we could either look at a centralized model or we could look at a embedded model, depending on what kind of a role we are playing. And based on the collective consciousness, collective wisdom of the customer as well as the teams that are working together, we arrive at a solution and say, yeah, this is the best method, it should work. So the designers become the custodian of the digital branding. They have to ensure that individually in every application it's taken care of and globally it is addressed, and therefore it is seamless, has the same experience across all the other applications, though you're not really in the other one, but you have a view of it. So these are basically the two ways teams have evolved across the world in terms of embedding designers or centralizing the design pool to work with the agile team, with the scrum masters, and move on. So both these two are potential ways of how teams get structured in an agile world and how design comes in. So essentially, we are looking at business owner. I came back to the previous. So I just took the previous picture that I had. This is what we had, right? And we started out for agile, basic picture of a scrum team, right? So now what we are basically looking at is an evolved pattern where you have your business owner, you have your influencers, both of them are influencing product owner, and the scrum master is facilitating the scrum team, and you have a design team guild, much like the others, and you put your designer into the scrum team embedded so that he can work with individual scrum teams. And even in your design team, we have a cross-functional role. So one guy is doing UX, one guy is doing UI, one guy is doing animation, one guy is doing AR, VR. We also have our set of roles. So we have that combination running here. So how does design fit itself into an agile world? As simple as seeing which works for those teams. So it could be central or it could be embedded, but essentially it all comes together to help evolve the process itself. So long story short, all that I told you in the last, I think, 1.5 hours is basically to bring this transformation in an ecosystem. And I just wanted to paint one ecosystem to you for you to understand what we mean when we say digital ecosystem is airport. Just taking an airport, for example. So you come into an arrival area, you have a reception here, you have kiosks over here. So you have information wayfinding kiosks over here. Digital signage is on the television screens. You have a person who could be working out of out of a laptop. You could have another person working out of a mobile. You could have a mobile connected to iBeacon. You could have them connected to a POS application in a store. And you could probably have the main command center that is operating in the background and giving all the data on the television screens with respect to what is the arrival and departure of the flights. And then you have the central monitoring system. So we are basically designing for television, for POS, for kiosk, for web, for mobile, and possibly even wearables. So we are looking at an entire digital ecosystem. where we are trying to enable end users, we are trying to enable the staff, we are trying to enable everybody to make sure that it's a smooth journey going forward, with all of this packed into it in the background, the methodology, the way we work, all of that. So that's really what digital transformation is about. So I'm open to questions. I read through the questions that were posted. I am hoping I have answered them in this presentation. If anybody still wants to ask questions, we can have a discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Kavitha, for your wonderful presentation on stitching user experience in agile development. In fact, all along we have been thinking that user experience is more of website design or maybe some sort of uh, making something easy to use. And beyond that, a group of people will be working with the design team in the beginning, and some sort of form design will be done. Then that role is completed and they will walk out. But the way you have presented, so they have become the integral part of the entire development team. So which is giving a lot of importance for the user experience. Of late, the user experience has become one of the top 10 trends. That's what some of the reports, they keep saying. So the emphasis on user experience and retaining customers. So these are all certain facts, which are going to improve your business. So particularly the way, you explained about the digital transformation in terms of keeping your customer happy, then only you will start growing, which has become a more or less a must for every organization. So you have clearly explained the way, the user experience concept, and also some of the examples what you have given. The military, we never knew that
Yeah.
military will be so much user experience oriented. Without military people, they live in all sorts of terrain, and then they get used to any type of work. But the design aspects with regard to military devices, something great. And same thing that airport. And you also brought in the concept of empathy, which is becoming a must, particularly in the context of people not having so much of digital literacy in country like India,
Mm.
where a lot of things are becoming more and more digital. The empathy and digital literacy become very important, and how to take care of these things into design aspect, it has been brought up very well. So overall, it
Thank you,
is an
sir.
excellent presentation, and definitely in fact, we could have organized one half a day workshop that would have been much more interactive. See, unfortunately, this online webinars, the interaction is relatively less.
Yes.
And however, overall, I could see the feedback what people have been giving were
Okay.
excellent.
Okay.
So in the meantime, there are a few questions have been posted in the chat box. So I would like
Okay.
to just keep asking. And see, there is the design and lean startup. See,
Hmm.
particularly the startups, they want to be sort of work with a lean team, and because they are in the initial stage and they can't burn out a lot of money and things like that. But whereas design is a more involved process, so which means it's a lean startup, how they can employ the user experience design aspects. They seem to be contradicting in terms of whether they can afford the user experience part, but without the user experience, the product may not be approved by the users.
Absolutely.
So how to sort of bridge that gap between the lean startup and then the user experience design?
So the thing is that we've always been on this, if I can use the word crusade, with for over uh, more than 15 years, trying to get UX some amount of importance in the otherwise digital space, right? Because it's so dominated by technology. It is important to get that first initial investment is very important to be done, because the moment you get into that sprint cycle state, you're going to just go into execution straight off. So at that point, it's lean. You can just keep rolling out as you go. But the initial investment of time to understand your business, to understand your end users, to see why your numbers are looking the way they are and how can you improve it, very important. That investment is absolutely necessary, because once you get into sprint cycles, it's it's a lean process. If they want to release, they can release in periodic sprints, or they can go up to the end and release it. They can go live. So it is not contradictory, but it just has to be planned better. That's all. Planning is a very important piece.
Okay, so in fact, if you look at the design professionals, they seem to be, uh, they are, at least they are expected to be well versed in so many aspects.
Mm.
Okay. How much coding is necessary for this design professionals? How much experience in terms of coding experience?
It's a good question. It's a good question. So the thing is, in India, these are two completely separate
Yes.
job descriptions, actually.
Yeah. Right.
Okay?
Right now they are looked at differently.
Yeah, no, they are, and I don't think they can be combined also.
No, but
For one,
when in Agile, say
yeah,
when they become a part of Agile team, so the overlap, will it still remain, or
yes, yes. So even if you're part of Agile, it doesn't mean that you have to code. I mean, for example, we designers, see, there's a fundamental thing about designers versus developers. We don't look at things in code, we look at things in pictures. Our visual imagination itself is in picture format, not in code form. It's not
so
logical thinking,
basically
it's
you
in
use a
pictures.
right brain and a left right.
Yeah,
So
it's a fundamental differences in the DNA. So
okay.
it is you. We cannot change that equation. But what we can do is, I mean, there are enough designers who try to do the HTML coding also. It's not like it's a no-no, but if you go into that zone, I have not really seen them come back to creative design. That is a trend that I have noticed. Very creative guys, when they go into HTML coding and stuff, they kind of get sucked into that world. So if you have to think creatively in visual form, you might lose that trait if you try to do the coding and the logical side of it also. So it is something that all our young professionals need to take a conscious decision in their careers, that which way do I want to go? Do I want to be hardcore designer, which means I will be visually creative? Or do I want to be logical, which means I can go into development? But 5 years down the line, if I attempt to be creative, it's going to be tougher,
Okay.
because you left that creative side of you somewhere
Yeah.
in the background,
Your
right?
your
So
your mindset is set.
yes, so the time has an impact. So
Okay.
it is very important that any aspirant in this space knows what they are doing. Is very important. Which way
So
they want to go.
which means that the arts and science subjects, they require to be taught in the beginning itself. I mean, again, we are
They need
going
to
back
know,
to the,
yeah.
yeah, we are going back to the old scheme. That giving more importance to the arts and science. In fact, the computer programming itself has been told is an art, not science. So
That is true.
people have been debating, that is it a science or
Absolutely.
art?
In
And
fact, what we say is, even if we are working for AR, VR, even if we are designing for augmented reality, the thought that we bring onto that, into that space, even that is a digital canvas for us to paint.
okay.
It's just that we are using 3D in it. We are using depth. Till now, we were doing two dimensional. Now you have to think depth as well. So your UI will work in, along with depth. So you have to really think what you're working with and go along with that.
So with design, I mean, sort of designers are becoming more and more important. And what is the strategy for any company, in terms of spotting the people, training them, and retaining? Basically, it is going to be a major issue, retaining. So it is going to be extremely difficult. You have
Spotting
many,
people,
yeah,
it's not okay. So interestingly, spotting people is not that difficult anymore. Design schools like engineering colleges, design schools are also waking up. Uh, UX has become an integral part of the curriculum in design schools, and you can spot talent there too. So you have there are developers. I mean, there are people who come from engineering background who want to do design. That is always there. That opening is always there. But you also have design schools that are evolving in this space. Previously, design schools were more towards they were going into advertising and other places, but now there's a shift because the digital space is so rich now. We have enough studios everywhere. There's a good influx of designers coming from design backgrounds, so it is an integral part of the curriculum as well for students.
Okay. And see, because most of our members, they happen to be people from engineering background. So what type of learning they need to undergo in terms of to becoming a good designer, apart from being a developer?
It's an interesting one. So what kind of learning you need to be, you need hands-on experience. Hands-on experience is vital because there are courses and things like that. There are a lot of certifications and courses on the internet, but they will address only 50% of the journey. The other 50% of the journey, we have to get into the space, we have to dirty our hands, we have to understand. The experience counts. Because it's only when you put that coursework, the certification that you got, when you put that into action, you know the kind of situations you're dealing with. Simple example, when I was telling you about the earlier, the stories I was bringing to the table, right? A course will tell you that you need to have a persona. The course will tell you that you need to make a customer journey from the persona. That the course will give you. But the course will not tell you that the store associate in New York needs to be dealt with differently from the guy who was sitting in Florida. And that will come only from experience, where you will realize that the motivations were completely different. So a course gives you only that much visibility. Your experience in various projects will give you the rest half, which is actually richer, because you will have your own intuitive capability to understand what is going on, what should be the right way of approach, and you will design based on that. Design, of course, has its own set of things, but in today's world, it's become a lot easier. We have all the design systems, we have best practices in iOS, in Android, in web, in the thing, in responsive web design, in progressive web apps. All of this is already defined. So there isn't too much you can do to break the system, really. But at the same time, to be creative, you need to be able to see the other side of things with respect to how is the end user seeing it. Otherwise, all the happy parts will look very straightforward, but you would have completely eliminated the inclusive aspect of it, which is actually becoming very important now with all the various kinds of compliance that are coming in. US has its own set of compliance. Europe has its own set of compliances. And you have to be compliant because it's a legal process. So privacy compliances are there. Disability compliances are there. So all of this stitches itself in. So it's kind of a combination of sentiment and logic.
So this means that, for the engineering student getting into design profession is relatively bit difficult.
Not difficult, but he has to take some trouble.
I said bit difficult. Okay. And in terms of the ethics in design, so what is the role of ethics in design? Recently there's a case, you must be hearing about the TRP, television reporting point, So basically it's an ethical issue. So the user experience is being taken for granted by deceiving people, right? So some sort of ethical issue is there. And similarly, when you are doing the form design, there are certain fields are pre-filled. So the user doesn't know. So particularly, you accept or maybe, you are subscribing to something. So there, the tick is pre-filled.
It's already ticked.
Yes. So
you have to uncheck it.
Yeah. Uncheck it. So unless, you are very cautious, it becomes very difficult. So the ethical principles in user design, how it is being taken care.
So the thing is, it's a very tightrope walk there, because on one side, if you're trying to look at the example of accepting terms and conditions, it's already checked and you have to uncheck it to continue to accept and whatever. The thing is that the business wants it in a particular way, and since everybody in business wants it the same way, it has sort of become a best practice. So where do we draw the line between ethics and best practice? Good question to ask. No one's really answered it. It's a difficult one. But typically what we do is, in order to address ethics, they have this whole thing called GDPR, privacy, with respect to privacy. They have this GDPR compliance, which is really coming up very strongly. And what they're doing is, they are telling you that for every text box where you're asking for the personal information of the end user, you basically need to tell the end user exactly why you want it. So if you're asking them that I want you to enter your mobile number or your email address, they give you the reason why. It has to be written over there. We are taking this because we want to do ABCD things. So that's the reason why it is written. So privacy compliance is a very important piece in the puzzle. So that is taking off now. There are a lot of legalities that are going around it. So we need to be very cognizant of all these compliances while we are designing. So it's not exactly a canvas and paint what you want, really. We have a whole humongous set of boundaries within which we are operating. So it is a real world where even developers can try. Because you have your boundaries already so totally set between best practices, between characteristics of iOS, Android, responsive design. Those principles are already set in stone. And it takes a lot for something like a WhatsApp to happen to go and get bought over by a Facebook, right? Otherwise, you were all calling Facebook God, and WhatsApp came by and nobody went to Facebook chat after that. So it takes one of those miracles to happen to change the rules of the game, essentially.
So far, in the name of user experience, we have been flouting basically the personalization. We have been flouting the privacy. So now it is all under check. So this
absolutely.
Is
so personalization again is, personalization is a huge component in UX, in the overall experience design itself. Personalization is very big. Customers are asking for personalization just about every industry, every domain. That is a given. It is how you get there. So if the user has not given you the information, we look at other data. That's where artificial intelligence is stepping up. Artificial intelligence actually goes and mines the data and comes back and tells you the past purchase patterns of this person. So there's something you could have just done, swiped your credit card twice or thrice in 2-3 months or whatever, but the bank already knows what you're doing. Your data is out there. So it's already, and one more thing, when we are signing up and registering with any particular site and we accept the terms and conditions, we are basically doling out our information to that company and saying it is yours to use. So we as individuals, if you don't want to be in the system, don't register. Then the problem of privacy doesn't come in. But if you go in and register, you're voluntarily offering your data to them, and they can do what they want with it, is what you sign up in that little checkbox over there. And they don't let you register till you say, yes, I will give you. So you can't do anything, right? Legally, they are covered. And we want to use it.
Yeah, now that the markets are no more confined to one small territory, it is global.
Absolutely.
So when it is global, how are the cultural differences, they impact the user experience design?
Yeah, it actually impacts us quite a lot because, on one side, we are trying to optimize our processes. We are trying to optimize our process. We are trying to, we haven't yet come to the point of automating, but we are optimizing to a large extent, where a site might look like it has got 500 pages, but the actual design work we put in will be only 80 pages, because we are taking unique templates and we are going with it. And 500 pages would be the count because there are 20 news items, but I designed only one page for that 20 news items. So you would count 20 news items, but I will count one page. Mm-hmm. So experience design kind of optimizes the effort of designing. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, when you talk culture context, China operates differently. Everything has to be read in China.
No, like Middle East things.
Middle East is still. I was very. No, I was actually very impressed with something with the Middle East. It kind of made me reconsider a thought I had. So if you look at Middle East and Arabic, doesn't mean that your site has to be designed right to left. No,
Okay.
your
Oh.
site continues to stay left to right, but your text rolls right to left. So, yes, so this myth of all of us sitting in India thinking Middle East is reverse actually doesn't work.
No,
So,
it reminds me one of the marketing joke,
yeah.
that a person trying to sell the washing powder. So he wanted to increase the sales of washing powder in Middle East. So he tried to sort of, from the left side dirty cloth and then right side
It worked
using river. So instead of sales going up, it dropped.
because he showed it in the reverse way. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. But actually speaking, the more we got exposed to the way the Middle Eastern sites are being designed, when you are dealing with Arabic, we are looking at a layout that goes left to right, but we're looking at text that goes right to left. But when we are looking at something like Hebrew text, that is entirely right to left.
Okay.
So whatever you design in English, put a mirror, that is Hebrew. So Hebrew is completely the opposite. But Arabic still continues to be left to right, but there are smaller nuances. The button, typically we'll have a name and then an icon will come after that text. In Arabic, the icon will come first and then the text will come. There are small changes that take place, but largely sites are still left to right, which was also an enlightenment for me.
Oh,
I was like, oh, okay, this is working differently. So I was really studying those Arabic sites to understand how they are thinking. So I was quite surprised to see that the way you read is still the same as English. Interesting, very interesting concept. So culturally, yes, we do have to take care of these minor things. Japan will not change easily. They will be exactly as they are. Even today, they will do waterfall. They will not look at agile. They work very differently.
They always believe in tested products.
No, they are very, yeah, they're very solid people, but it's very difficult to win their trust and it takes a while. So, yeah, Japan works differently, China works differently. So we have to cater to individual cultures. But these are the ways we do it.
Okay. Can you just briefly outline the basic difference between the product design and interactive design of websites? The design principles, how far do they differ?
So one thing is whether it's a product or whether it's a service first.
Yes.
Okay. So product is when you are looking at a single product holistically. It could be any application. It could be, let me just take an example of what I've already done in the past. It could either be a POS application, which is a proper product running, or it could be something like a loyalty management system of some sort, which is also a type of product. So these are large thought processes, a whole thought process, an ecosystem that runs. Interaction design is a subset inside that journey. Interaction design is for that product to be envisioned the way it is, I need to think about the experience design. And for experience design, again, I'm bifurcating, like we had said earlier in this presentation. It is UX and UI and interaction. So UX is basically how is this person going to go about this whole thing? What's a movement, navigation, functionality, the interaction, all of that. And UI is the aesthetic element, the brand strategy that you're bringing in. All of this stitches in. All this put together becomes product. Okay. Or that is the whole equation.
So
that's how it runs.
User interface becomes more important in product.
Yeah.
That way, okay. Okay, yeah. There's one more question. With regard to strategy, you have been telling, the first aspect is the strategy in user design. So the first thing being is what the customer wants. You need to find out and things like that. But, typically if you look at the case of Steve Jobs, he goes on a totally tangential thing. The user doesn't know anything. He doesn't know what he wants. So he build a product which is user friendly. So where is the contradiction between Steve Jobs and then the strategy?
Okay, it's not a contradiction really. The difference is here. 99% of the customers you find will take the safe beaten track. The safe beaten track basically means one person has already experimented. Million users have already acknowledged. So the others will follow this and play safe. You need one-off guy like Steve Jobs to walk in and say, no, it's not the way it works. And I'll come up with something entirely new that completely, it just foxes everybody out. So what we're looking at over here is one of the brand strategies of Apple was to be creative. The thought mattered. Creativity is in the thought. It extends itself into all the various professions that we have, and it expresses itself in code. It expresses itself in UX. It expresses itself in how business rolls, and that's how Apple looks the way it does. But where did it start? It starts with how Steve Jobs came up with the whole iPhone concept, right? The moment
iPod and this one iPhone.
Exactly. When that iPod hit the market, it shook the market, right?
Yes.
People were shocked that something like this could even happen. Till then, we were all sitting and pressing buttons on a BlackBerry, right? Correct. And when that came in, it was like everybody just fell off, right? But today, what do we do? Today, it's a necessity. If
it has become an integral part. Yeah.
Yes. If you don't have a phone which does not respond to you the way it has been given, today it's like you won't even pick up that phone, right? We need one swipe and that screen has to roll. Right? We're looking at that kind of responsiveness. So it is basically the thought that matters. And somebody or the other, after Steve Jobs, we still got a WhatsApp, right? WhatsApp came in and it was disruptive. We still got artificial intelligence. We still got AR, VR. There are things that people are still experimenting. So it is how you go about experimenting with things and change the rules of the game. Nobody is stopping us from changing the rules of the game. But yes, we need to know the rules before we change them. That's very important. Know the rule first, then break it and come up with something new that's totally acceptable. So you have a complete inherent understanding of what the world is used to. Then you go and disrupt. Yeah. Gmail did that. We were all used to folders in Yahoo, and Gmail came and put labels, and we were completely thrown off.
Yes.
So things happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And then one more question is in terms of compensation for the design professionals. How far do they get more than the developers, or where do they come in terms of compensation?
Design professionals versus developers is basically company to company. It is something that the companies decide. So it's not exactly blanket statement that I can roll out numbers right now. Mm-hmm. But one insight that I can give, having been in the industry long enough and having looked at the educational side of things as well as the industry side of things, anyone who in the UX space, anyone who comes with a design background definitely stands a better chance compared to a person who doesn't have a design background. And the design background needs to come from a reputed institution. So it's typically like, engineering also has the same logic. So it follows the same logic even in design. But a person with a design degree definitely has a upper hand compared to a person who is in engineering and trying to come into design.
Okay. One final question about the, do you have any estimate of the UX market?
Estimate in what sense?
Market size, in terms of development effort. Yeah.
In terms of effort or in terms of
basically, we say that developmental is about something like 300 billion. So what is the component of UX in that?
Okay, I wouldn't really be able to throw a number here.
Basically, we're just trying to find out where the ratio between development and UX design in a project.
Okay, so I can give you. Okay, typically, what I have seen over a period of time when it comes to effort of UX versus development, if development has a particular value for the effort, UX takes about 1/3 of that.
So basically, it's considered lower in terms of
lower
value.
Meaning
value, is it? Does it mean that in terms of value it is?
It will boil down to value also. So here's the thing. That this is I don't want to give it as a blanket statement actually, because what we are headed towards is, see, it's like taking a normal project, which is what everybody's used to, and we talking about a design-led deliverable, which is an entirely different equation. So in a design-led deliverable, design takes precedence over development and the rest. So that's where the industry is heading now.
No, but how the market reacts? Does the market give more weightage for this design?
Absolutely. So we do have a certain set of customers who are very sensitized to design already, and therefore they are willing to shell out that much more. For design. So you will have a development cost, but your design cost boosts up as well when your customer is familiar with what's happening and wants to have an enhanced experience, and therefore we call that design-led. At TCS, we call this design-led.
Okay.
To be very precise, at TCS, we call this a design-led experience.
You are setting standards, basically. TCS
Absolutely. So that's when the boost will happen to the overall cost. So we have all sorts of customers. We have customers who don't understand design at all. You do what you made, but he will not understand. So there are customers who don't understand design. There are customers who don't have budget.
Okay. Yeah, that's the reason I was telling whether the UX, how much importance,
Simple thing. Let me just give you a simple example. When you're looking at responsive web design versus progressive web app. Progressive web app is a concept that came up to make life easy for a company that doesn't have enough budget. So when this customer actually wants to be seen in a multi-channel environment, he wants to be on websites, he wants to be on mobile phone, he also wants to look native. Progressive web app is what he would pick if he did not want to spend so much money, which means that he is taking a solution with a lesser cost to beat what you would have otherwise given as a greater cost with responsive design, native application, iOS, Android, that would have boosted his price. So to give him the same experience, not for the same cost, but kind of getting to the same solution, progressive web app would be the way to go. So there are solutions in the market that do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Depends
excellent. Excellent. So I think we are trying to close the event. And so excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Kavitha, for your wonderful presentation. On behalf of the organizing units, ACM, IEEE Computer Society, and CSI, our sincere thanks for your effort and time in terms of explaining and beautifully answering some of the questions, very tricky questions also, without without any hesitation, you could give the answers. So we are really thankful, and we really look at the option of having a longer session, a workshop type of thing, to get more people and possibly try to have an interactive section. So that way, at a later date, we'll be in touch with you. And once again, thank you very much. And
I also wanted to thank all of you. I wanted to thank Mr. P.V. Subramanian and Mr. Sakthivel and Dr. Akhila also. And of course, Sir Mohan, sir, you've been the most instrumental person to get me back here. Thank you all so much for being really patient with me, for giving me so much time, getting me this fantastic audience. I totally enjoyed
thank you.
Storytelling.
Thank you. Thank you, madam.
Thank you. Before we wind up our session, just two announcements regarding our forthcoming events. On 20th, we have a program on value-based IT solution delivery through disciplined Agile. And on 27th, we have a program on mobile forensics and cyber crime investigations. So we look forward to people registering and attending the program. So with this, we will wind up today's session, and thank you very much to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks.